Do you ever look at your paycheck, see that automatic deduction disappearing into your retirement account, and quietly ask yourself, when will this actually be enough? If you feel worn down by the constant pressure to keep saving, know that this feeling is extremely common. For years, the standard advice handed out has been almost identical. Save more, work longer, cut back on the things you enjoy, and just hope it all works out in the end. It can feel like a financial treadmill that never switches off. And honestly, that endless grind takes a real toll on people over time. But what if you didn't have to keep saving all the way up to the day you officially retire? Today, we're going to look at something that could completely change how you think about your paycheck. The exact mathematical point at which you can safely and permanently stop making those automatic contributions. We're talking about the specific age and dollar amount at which your existing savings can take over the heavy lifting, allowing you to stop saving and start living the life you want right now, instead of decades from now. There's a lot of valuable ground to cover, so settle in and take your time with this. First, we're going to challenge the deeply ingrained idea that age 65 is some kind of magic finish line. Then, we'll walk through a simple, almost embarrassingly straightforward way to calculate your personal enough number, factoring in your future Social Security benefits so that target feels far less intimidating than it first appears. After that, we'll look closely at the coast milestone, that thrilling moment when compound growth quietly takes over your nest egg completely without any further help from you. Finally, we'll stress test this plan against real-world costs like healthcare, inflation, and taxes. And we'll talk honestly about the mental and emotional shift it takes to move from aggressively saving to finally allowing yourself to spend. By the end, you should have a much clearer sense of exactly where you stand. Let's start with the elephant in the room. Ask almost anyone when they plan to retire, and the default answer is almost always 65. It's practically hardwired into how people think about their working lives from the moment they enter the workforce. But where did that number actually come from? It certainly wasn't handed down as some kind of universal law of nature. In reality, the age 65 retirement standard was largely shaped by old corporate pension plans and government programs that were established close to a century ago, at a time when life expectancy and the broader financial landscape looked nothing like they do today. And yet, society as a whole still treats 65 as this magical line in the sand where a person is suddenly allowed to stop working and start enjoying life. That idea deserves a real challenge, because treating your 65th birthday as your ultimate financial finish line can actually be a trap, one that keeps people working harder and longer than they truly need to. To be fair, that specific age does carry real, practical meaning in the United States. Turning 65 is genuinely important because it's the exact moment a person becomes eligible for Medicare, and securing affordable health coverage that isn't tied to an employer is a meaningful step toward independence. And for most people, age 67 is another significant milestone, since that is the full retirement age for Social Security. Those are important dates when it comes to accessing guaranteed government benefits. But here is the critical distinction that matters most. Those birthdays only tell you when you're allowed to start collecting benefits. They say absolutely nothing about when you're allowed to stop saving your own hard-earned money. Your ability to stop contributing to your retirement accounts has nothing to do with how many birthdays you've celebrated. To really find freedom here requires a bigger mindset shift. Instead of thinking about retirement as a specific date circled on a calendar, it helps to think of it as a financial threshold that you cross. Retirement readiness isn't really about reaching your mid-60s. It's simply a math equation. It's the moment when your invested assets, combined with whatever guaranteed income you'll have down the road, can comfortably support the lifestyle you actually want for the rest of your life. Once you untie your savings plan from your age, something interesting happens. You realize you don't have to blindly keep funneling money into your investment accounts all the way until you reach a standard retirement age. The decision is entirely in your own hands. When the focus shifts from an arbitrary age that society picked on your behalf to a specific, personal, mathematical number, you take back real control over your paycheck. For a lot of people, that financial threshold is crossed years, sometimes even a full decade, before they're actually ready to stop working altogether. Imagine the relief of realizing at 55 or 60 that your nest egg is already large enough to carry you to the finish line, and that you can safely ease off the gas pedal today. You could stop saving, start spending some of that extra money on things you genuinely enjoy, and let your existing investments quietly do the rest of the work. That is real financial freedom, and it very often arrives much earlier than most people expect. So how do you actually find out whether you've crossed that threshold? In financial planning, this is referred to as finding your enough number, the exact amount of money you need sitting in your investment accounts to safely support your lifestyle for the rest of your life, out of your own pocket. This is where your best friend in this whole process shows up: United States Social Security. A very common mistake is calculating total yearly living expenses, say $80,000, and immediately multiplying that entire amount by 25. That produces a genuinely frightening target of $2 million. That is the wrong way to do this math. You should only multiply the portion of income that your investments actually need to generate themselves. To do this correctly, you'll want to check your official Social Security Administration account and pull your latest statement. Look at what your estimated monthly benefit will be at your full retirement age. Take your total expected living expenses and subtract that guaranteed Social Security income first. The difference between those two numbers is the only amount your investments actually have to cover. Let's walk through a real example to see just how much this shrinks the target. Picture a couple, David and Sarah, sitting down at their kitchen table and working out that a genuinely comfortable retirement, one that covers their bills, keeps the lights on, and allows for the occasional trip to visit the grandkids, will cost them a total of $80,000 a year. If they simply applied the rule of 25 to that entire $80,000, they'd conclude they need $2 million saved up, a number large enough to make anyone want to give up before they even start. But instead, David and Sarah check their actual Social Security statements rather than guessing. David is set to receive $24,000 a year from his Social Security benefits, and Sarah is set to receive $18,000 a year from hers. Together, that's $42,000 a year of guaranteed government income arriving regardless of what the stock market happens to be doing. Subtracting that $42,000 from their $80,000 total need leaves a gap of just $38,000 a year. And that $38,000 is the only amount their personal savings actually need to generate. Applying the rule of 25 to this smaller, more realistic number, $38,000 multiplied by 25 equals $950,000. By simply factoring in the Social Security benefits they've paid into throughout their working lives, David and Sarah slashed their retirement savings goal by over $1 million. Their target went from feeling impossible to feeling genuinely achievable. Once you know your own personal target number, you've unlocked the hardest part of this entire puzzle. But here's the best part. Sounds complicated at first, but the underlying math is genuinely simple. This relies on something known as the 4% rule. Without getting lost in dense historical market data, the basic idea is this. With a properly diversified portfolio, it's generally reasonable to withdraw about 4% of its value in the first year of retirement. Then, adjust that withdrawal amount for inflation every year afterward, and the money should reasonably last around 30 years. There's an even quicker shortcut for this called the Rule of 25. To find your enough number, simply take the annual income you need your investments to generate and multiply it by 25. For example, Suppose you work out that you need your investment accounts to produce exactly $40,000 a year for you to live comfortably. Multiply that $40,000 by 25, and there's your target, $1 million. Now, $1 million can understandably feel overwhelming. How is anyone supposed to save that much before they want to stop working? Take a breath, because here is where one of the biggest stress relievers in all of retirement planning comes into play. You do not actually have to fund your entire retirement lifestyle entirely. You probably won't even need to save that entire amount yourself. This brings us to what might be the single best milestone in the whole financial journey, the concept known as coasting. Hitting your coast number is the exact mathematical moment when the amount you've already saved has become large enough that it will grow into your final target number entirely on its own, without you ever needing to add another dollar of your own money to your investment accounts. This is the point where the math genuinely takes over. It helps to stop thinking of compound growth as something stressful left over from a high school math class, and start thinking of it as pure relief. Compound growth is simply the financial engine that takes over the heavy lifting on your behalf. Instead of you working hard for your money every day, your money finally starts working hard for you. To understand how powerful this engine really is, it helps to look at the long-term historical performance of the U.S. stock market. The S&P 500 index, which tracks the largest companies in America, has historically returned an average of roughly 10% a year over long periods. Subtracting about 3% to account for the rising cost of living leaves a conservative, reliable real growth rate of roughly 7% a year. That 7% is the fuel behind the engine. It means that while you're asleep, while you're out walking the dog, and while you're spending time with your family, your nest egg is quietly and steadily growing in the background. But how do you know exactly when that background growth becomes enough to safely stop contributing? This is where a simple tool called the Rule of 72 comes in. Take the number 72 and divide it by your expected annual growth rate, in this case, a safe 7%. 72 divided by 7 comes out to roughly 10. What does that number mean? It means that, on average, your invested money will completely double in size roughly every 10 years, entirely on its own. Let's bring David and Sarah back to the table to see this rule in action. Remember, they worked out that they need $950,000 total to comfortably retire at 65. Suppose David and Sarah are currently 55 years old, and when they check their retirement accounts, they find they currently have $475,000 saved. Because they are exactly 10 years away from their goal age of 65, they can confidently apply the Rule of 72. Over the next 10 years, that $475,000 should double, growing into their exact target of $950,000 without them contributing another cent from their paychecks. They have officially hit their coast milestone. This is where things get genuinely exciting, because hitting this number unlocks real lifestyle freedom immediately, not decades down the road. Think about what this actually means day to day. If you hit your coast number, you could reduce your automatic retirement contributions down to zero, and your current paycheck would suddenly look noticeably larger. What would you do with that extra money? Maybe finally book that trip you've been putting off, upgrade something around the house, help a grandchild with college costs, or simply enjoy a more comfortable daily life without the constant guilt of feeling like you should be saving more. The freedom of coasting goes even further than just extra spending money, though. Because you no longer need to save aggressively for the future, you might find you no longer need your high-stress job either. You might step away from a demanding career and take on a lower-paying, part-time role that you genuinely enjoy, working a couple of days a week somewhere you actually like, bringing in just enough to cover groceries and utilities. That trade-off can mean drastically less stress, more of your own time back, and a far better overall balance, all while your nest egg keeps quietly doubling in the background. You don't have to wait for a standard retirement age to start reclaiming your life. Coasting proves that you do not need to keep saving all the way up to your retirement date. The math will do the work, as long as you let it. Before rushing off to cut your retirement contributions tomorrow morning, it's worth stepping back and stress testing these numbers against a few real-world factors. Your enough number and your coast milestone are genuinely powerful concepts, but they don't exist in a vacuum. If a few specific realities are ignored, they can throw the whole plan off track. The first reality to address is the hidden cost of healthcare. There's a common misconception that once someone turns 65, Medicare simply covers everything. Unfortunately, that isn't the case. Monthly premiums are still owed out of pocket for Medicare Part B, which covers everyday doctor visits, and Part D, which covers prescription drugs. There's also a lesser-known trap that catches many people off guard: a government surcharge called IRMAA. In plain terms, if income rises too high in a given year during retirement, for example, from selling property or taking a large withdrawal from investments, the government can charge a noticeably higher Medicare premium as a result, even for identical coverage. It's important to build a real buffer into your target number to account for these out-of-pocket medical costs. The second reality that needs planning is the quiet, ongoing effect of inflation. Everyone feels this at the grocery store, at the gas pump, and on the monthly utility bill. The cost of everyday living keeps creeping upward. If someone hits their coast number and decides to pull all their money out of the market to keep it safely as cash, inflation will slowly and steadily erode that money's purchasing power over the following 20 years. Money generally needs to stay properly invested, even throughout retirement, so it can continue growing fast enough to outpace the rising cost of basic goods. The goal isn't a nest egg that just sits still. It's one that actively keeps up with rising prices. The third and final reality is an honest look at the U.S. tax system, because taxes are absolutely still owed on much of this money. A lot of people forget that funds sitting in a traditional 401k or traditional IRA have never actually been taxed yet. When that money is eventually withdrawn and spent in retirement, it's taxed as ordinary income by the IRS, and the government won't wait indefinitely to collect. This brings up a major rule known as Required Minimum Distributions, or RMDs. Under current law, once a person reaches age 73, a threshold set to shift to age 75 by the year 2033, the IRS requires a specific percentage of money to be withdrawn from pre-tax retirement accounts every single year, whether or not that money is actually needed to live on. Failing to take an RMD triggers a steep tax penalty. This is exactly why proactive tax planning matters so much. Part of any nest egg is effectively already earmarked for the IRS, and a realistic enough number needs to account for that, so there's still plenty of spending money left over. Beyond the math and the real-world stress test, there's something rarely discussed that turns out to be one of the hardest parts of this entire journey: the emotional shift from being a lifelong saver to finally becoming a spender. For 30 or 40 years, the habit has been to squirrel away every extra dollar, sacrifice, delay gratification, and nervously watch an account balance climb year after year. Saving becomes deeply ingrained. So when the math finally says it's safe to stop, actually flipping that switch mentally can be surprisingly stressful. Plenty of people hit their coast number, or even their full enough number, and still remain paralyzed by the fear of actually spending what they've built, staying in jobs they dislike simply because letting go of a steady paycheck feels too frightening. It's worth giving yourself full permission to actually enjoy the wealth you've worked so hard to build. The heavy lifting has already been done. The rules have already been followed. And it's genuinely okay to ease off and enjoy the results now. The ultimate purpose of money isn't a high number sitting on a bank statement. It's funding a life that's actually enjoyed today. Simply saying, "don't worry," isn't enough to calm real nerves, though, which is why a practical, reliable tool matters here: the cash bucket strategy. Here's how it works. Instead of leaving all retirement money tied up in the stock market, where values naturally rise and fall, a separate, protected bucket of cash is set aside that stays completely safe. The idea is to calculate roughly 1 to 2 years' worth of living expenses and place that specific amount into a highly secure, easy-to-access account, such as a high-yield savings account or a certificate of deposit, often called a CD. Why do this? Because the stock market is guaranteed to have bad years eventually. That's simply normal. But with 1 to 2 years of expenses sitting safely in a cash bucket and earning interest, there's never a need to sell stocks at a loss just to cover an electric bill or a grocery run. Bills get paid from the cash bucket while the market is given time to recover. This simple strategy builds a protective buffer around retirement savings, providing real peace of mind when it's finally time to stop saving and start enjoying the retirement that's been earned. There's a lot to take in here. But taking real control of a financial future really does come down to 3 simple, actionable steps. First, sit down and honestly estimate real living expenses for retirement. Second, check an official Social Security statement to see exactly how much guaranteed income is coming. Third, subtract that Social Security number from total expenses and use the rule of 25 together with the rule of 72 to calculate a personal cost number. Once that mathematical target is known, the endless saving grind finally has a clear, achievable finish line. Retirement doesn't have to be a mystery, and it definitely doesn't have to be a source of constant stress. With a clear number in hand, the whole picture becomes a lot easier to plan around, and a lot easier to actually enjoy.